The waiting area at the Rexall on Mount Pleasant had 4 chairs, a rack of reading glasses, and a television playing a home improvement show on mute. Emerson Dade had been standing in the prescription line for 11 minutes when the man beside him spoke. "Excuse me." The voice was quiet. "Careful. I wonder if you'd be willing to do something a bit unusual." Emerson Dade looked up from his phone. The man standing beside him was somewhere in his mid to late 70s. It was difficult to say precisely. He wore a pressed gray cardigan over a white collared shirt, the kind of outfit that suggested he had been raised to believe you dressed properly before going anywhere, no exceptions. He was holding a small paper bag from the pharmacy counter. His hands were folded around it the way a person holds something they're not sure they need, but can't bring themselves to put down. "My name is Harvey," the man said. "Harvey Tate." He said it the way Emerson's grandfather used to introduce himself. Full name, as though the surname were part of the handshake. "I called ahead this morning to let the pharmacist know my son would be coming with me today, to help with the medication review. She's very thorough." A pause. "She'll want to go over everything twice." Emerson waited. Harvey looked down at the paper bag. "My son is in Calgary," he said. "He means to visit. He always does." He said it without bitterness or reproach, which somehow made it worse. "I was wondering whether you'd be willing to stand with me for 10 minutes. Just until she's finished the review. I realize it's a strange thing to ask." Emerson glanced at his watch. He had a conference call at 4. He had 10 unread emails. He had a parking meter somewhere on Yonge that was either expired or about to be. He looked at Harvey Tate, who had already begun squaring his shoulders slightly, the unconscious preparation for a polite refusal. "Sure," Emerson said, "I can do that." Harvey's expression changed in the particular way that people's expressions change when they have been bracing for a no and received a yes. Not surprise exactly, more like relief that still hadn't finished arriving. "Thank you," he said. "I won't take more of your time than I said." The pharmacist's name tag read Paloma. She was young, late 20s, Emerson guessed, with her dark hair pulled back and a focused, unhurried manner that made you feel like your file was the only file she had. She looked between Emerson and Harvey without surprise or commentary, pulled up the record on her screen, and went through the 4 medications with the quiet competence of someone who doesn't need to announce itself. She explained each one, when to take it, what to watch for. She asked Harvey twice if he had questions, once at the beginning and once at the end, which struck Emerson as exactly the right approach. "Does he have someone checking in on him daily?" she asked, and she was looking at Emerson when she asked it. He felt a shift in his chest that he didn't examine too closely. "We're working on that," he said. Harvey said nothing. Outside, the October air had the particular sharpness that Toronto reserved for mid-autumn. Not yet cold enough for a real coat, but enough to remind you it was coming. Harvey buttoned his cardigan at the collar and stood for a moment on the sidewalk, looking south the way people look when they're deciding how much time they actually have. "Thank you," he said again, "truly." "It was nothing," Emerson said. "It wasn't, but I appreciate you saying so." Harvey nodded toward the park. "There's a bench by Sherwood Park. I usually sit for a bit before I catch the bus. Good afternoon light this time of year." He said it the way people describe rituals they have performed so many times they've become private. Emerson thought about the parking meter. "I'll walk with you," he said. Harvey looked at him sideways. "You've already done more than I asked." "I know. I'm choosing to ignore that." A small sound that was not quite a laugh but was adjacent to one. "My students used to do that." "You were a teacher?" "Physics. 38 years at Leaside." He said it the way people say a school's name when they mean the whole enterprise, the classrooms, the hallways, the particular smell of chalk dust and winter boots. A very long time to explain Newton's first law to 14-year-olds who are largely thinking about lunch. Did it ever stop feeling that way? Harvey considered the question with what Emerson would come to recognize as his characteristic seriousness about small things. "No," he said, "but somewhere in the middle, I stopped minding." The bench faced west into the park. The afternoon light was exactly as described. Low, amber, catching the maples at an angle that made the whole block look briefly like something worth looking at. Harvey produced a small thermos from his bag and poured 2 cups of tea without asking. It was a gesture of such matter-of-fact hospitality that Emerson took his cup without thinking. They talked. Harvey told him about Marta. his wife who had died 22 months ago in February. He described her the way people describe someone they had genuinely liked, not merely loved. She had grown tomatoes on the balcony of their apartment and spent 3 consecutive summers in a low-grade disagreement with the building manager about the weight limits for planter boxes. She had, in 46 years of marriage, never successfully parallel parked. She had opinions about tea that were, according to Harvey, largely correct. Emerson told him about the firm, 12 years of building Dade & Associates architecture, from a 2-person operation in a rented office on King West into something with enough work to keep him occupied past any reasonable hour. He said it the way he always said it, as evidence of effort, and Harvey listened in the way that made him hear it slightly differently, as a description of what he had chosen instead of other things. Then the phone appeared. Harvey withdrew it from his cardigan pocket with the particular caution of a person who had been told this device was simple, and found the claim personally insulting. "My son showed me how to do the video calling," he said. "I've been trying to reproduce it from memory." Emerson looked at the screen. "You're in the camera. Is that not the right place?" "For calling someone, no." Harvey pressed something. The phone took a photograph of his own left shoe. "That's your shoe," Emerson said. Yes, Harvey regarded it with dignity. "I see that." "Here." Emerson showed him the right menu. Harvey pressed the wrong icon anyway, a precise half-inch to the left, and sent a 12-second voice memo of ambient traffic noise to a contact labeled Conrad, Calgary. Harvey stared at the screen. What did I just send him? About 12 seconds of Yonge Street. Harvey sighed with the composure of a man who had once taught thermodynamics to 32 teenagers simultaneously and was not going to be undone by a touchscreen. "He'll think I called by accident." "Technically." "He'll worry," Harvey said, as though this settled the matter. He slid the phone back into his pocket. "He worries too much." A pause and then something quieter. "I'd prefer he called because he wanted to. Not because he was anxious." He looked at the park. "But I understand why he does it the other way." Emerson didn't have an answer. He sat with the gap where one should have been and drank his tea. Harvey had promised 10 minutes. They stayed for 50. The visits began to accumulate. Harvey called the firm's main line 3 days later. He had taken one of Emerson's cards, without Emerson noticing, and asked, very politely, whether Emerson knew anything about grow lights for indoor tomatoes. Emerson did not. He drove over anyway, and spent an hour at Harvey's kitchen table reading instructions for a lamp they ordered online, while Harvey made tea and asked whether Emerson had eaten properly. Today, the question delivered so neutrally that Emerson couldn't tell whether it was small talk or genuine inquiry. It was genuine. He realized this when Harvey produced a container of leftover soup without waiting for an answer. Harvey Tate's apartment on Millwood Road was small and arranged with the organized precision of a man who lived alone and had decided to do it well. Books on every surface, physics, Canadian history, a great deal of Alice Munro, some P.D. James. Photographs on the windowsill. Marta at what looked like Killarney Provincial Park. Marta at a kitchen table, laughing at something outside the frame. Harvey's matchmaking, Emerson would understand only later, began immediately and with zero subtlety. Paloma Cruz arrived on the first Thursday Emerson visited. She came every Thursday through the pharmacy's senior outreach program, checking in on patients who needed help managing their prescriptions at home. Harvey mentioned this in advance with an elaborate air of having only just remembered it. He also, that evening, ran out of milk and asked Paloma if she knew where the nearest grocery store was, despite living 4 blocks from one for 23 years. Paloma looked at Harvey with a slight narrowing of the eyes that said she was not entirely fooled. She looked at Emerson with an expression that was simply evaluative, the way a person looks when deciding something. "The Metro on Millwood," she said. 8 minutes. She handed Harvey his medication organizer. "I can show you if you like." Harvey said his knee was bothering him. It had been fine 30 seconds ago. Walking back from the Metro, Paloma asked Emerson how he'd met Harvey. He told her. She listened without interrupting, which he noticed because most people didn't. "He does that," she said, "asks for small things. The pretending to be his son part. It's not just you. He asked the transit driver to walk him to the bus stop once. The driver did it." She paused. "There's something about how he asks. He's not manipulating anyone. He just makes it feel like the reasonable thing to do is to say yes." Emerson thought about that. Is it the reasonable thing? She looked at him briefly. Usually, she said, yeah. Harvey, when they returned, was sitting in his armchair with his eyes closed. He opened one when they came in. That was quick. You were watching, Emerson said. I was resting. Your eyes were open. I rest with my eyes open sometimes. He accepted the milk. Did you have a nice walk? Emerson sat down. You're not subtle, Harvey. I'm extremely subtle, Harvey said. I'm simply not effective yet. He noticed the Tuesday pattern about 6 weeks in. Every Tuesday Harvey went to the Rexall, not always for a prescription, occasionally for nothing visible at all. He came home with a bag sometimes, and sometimes with empty hands, and always in better spirits than he'd left. Emerson had attributed this to the outing itself. He was driving past on a Tuesday in November when he saw Harvey through the pharmacy window, not at the counter, sitting in one of the waiting chairs, talking to Paloma, who was on her lunch break to judge by the container on the counter beside her. They were laughing at something. Harvey's posture was completely different from how he sat at home, less careful, less contained, the way a person looks when they need to take up as little space as possible. Emerson sat in the car for a long moment, then he went in. Harvey spotted him. Something brief moved across his face, a flash of a man who has been observed doing something he wasn't hiding, exactly, but wasn't advertising either. Then the warmth returned, completely genuine. He asked about it on Saturday. You go every Tuesday, Emerson said. Harvey watched the hockey game without looking at him. I have medications. Not every week. Silence. Harvey. The game went to a whistle. Harvey picked up his mug and turned it in his hands. He did this, Emerson had observed, when thinking about something he wasn't sure he wanted to say. After Marta died, Harvey said, the apartment got very quiet. I knew it would. I had thought about it. But knowing something doesn't prepare you for the actual sound of it. He paused. Conrad calls when he can. He visited in the spring. He has children, his own life. I understood that. He said it carefully, without making it a complaint. At the pharmacy, Paloma remembers my name. She asks about the knee. When I came in with a cold in January, she called 2 days later to check whether I was managing. He looked down at the mug. I go because for 30 minutes, there is somewhere I am expected. Emerson said nothing for a long time. On the television, someone scored. Neither of them moved. I realize how that sounds, Harvey said. It doesn't sound small, Emerson said. If that's what you're waiting for me to say. Harvey nodded once, slowly, and turned back to the game. He found the letter by accident. Harvey had asked him to retrieve an insurance document from the filing cabinet in the bedroom closet. The ask itself was a form of trust, and Emerson understood it as such. The cabinet was organized with the precision of a former teacher, labeled chronological, alphabetical within categories. The envelope was tucked into the back of a folder marked personal, unsealed, the flap folded over but not stuck. His eyes caught the first line before he understood what he was reading. Marta. He stopped. He put the envelope carefully back. He stood in the small bedroom for a moment, looking at the photograph on the dresser. Marta, younger, standing on a dock somewhere northern with the slightly startled expression of someone who has just been photographed against their will but doesn't actually mind. He took the insurance document to the kitchen and said nothing. He thought about the letter for 4 days. Then he asked Harvey directly. Harvey turned his mug in his hands for a long time before he spoke. I wrote it a week before our 47th anniversary, he said. I'd been planning it for months. I was never good at those things. Marta always said I expressed myself by fixing what was broken, and I suppose I did. But I had been thinking for a long time that there were things she should hear said plainly, not just implied. He looked toward the window. She died 4 days before the date, in her sleep. Very quietly, the way she did most things. Emerson waited. The letter stayed, Harvey said. I couldn't send it. I couldn't throw it away. What does it say? Harvey looked at him steadily. That I was proud of the life we built. That I was a difficult person to live with for longer than I should have been. Impatient, too focused on what wasn't finished, bad at looking at what was. That she was the wisest person I have ever known, and I was sorry it took me the better part of 30 years to stop being afraid of saying so plainly. He paused. Conrad doesn't know any of it. He grew up with the earlier version of me. I think that's the one he still carries. Have you talked to him About any of it? Harvey's expression was the quiet, specific tiredness of someone who has arrived at a destination they kept intending to reach. I keep thinking there's more time, he said. The call came on a Sunday in November, and Emerson was there. Harvey had been reaching for the kettle when he went pale and had to sit down very suddenly, hand flat on the counter, the color going out of his face in the particular way that is never incidental. The paramedics were polite and efficient. Harvey apologized to them twice for the inconvenience. Emerson rode in the ambulance and did not correct him about anything. Low blood pressure, dehydration, manageable. The doctor was clear and measured. Harvey was stable by evening and had resumed being mildly critical of the hospital food by the following morning, which the primary nurse told Emerson was a reliable indicator of recovery. Conrad Tate landed at Pearson at 10 o'clock that night. He was 51, broad across the shoulders, with his father's same careful stillness and an expression that Emerson recognized from his own years running a company. The look of a person who has been managing something important from a safe distance and has just been handed evidence that this was a miscalculation. They shook hands in the corridor. "You've been spending time with him," Conrad said. "Yes." Conrad looked toward the room. "Thank you," he said, "for being there today." Emerson nodded. He thought about the letter in the filing cabinet. He thought about Harvey's voice. "I keep thinking there's more time." He thought about his own father in Guelph, whom he called on birthdays and had last visited 16 months ago, who always answered on the second ring, who was always near the phone. He stepped into the corridor and called his father. His father picked up on the second ring. They talked for 50 minutes. It was the longest conversation they'd had in years. And almost none of it was about anything that could have been handled by email. In December, Harvey mentioned the job offer with a deliberate casualness that Emerson had learned to read as its opposite. Paloma had been offered a regional pharmacy management position in Victoria, a real step forward. Exactly the kind of role she had been working toward for 6 years. She had 12 days to decide. Emerson told himself it was not his business. He had known her for 2 months. They had talked in Harvey's kitchen and on walks through Sherwood Park, and once in the vitamin aisle of the Rexall, for 20 minutes, while Harvey, who had come in for calcium supplements, became deeply confused about where the calcium supplements were, despite purchasing them there monthly for 4 years. He told himself this several times in a deliberate row, which was how he knew none of it was working. He called Harvey. "What is she thinking?" "She says she hasn't decided." A pause. "She also mentioned she would miss Tuesdays." A longer pause. "She looked at you when she said it, and I was watching her face." "Harvey." "I am 77 years old," Harvey said pleasantly. "I have run out of patience for watching people perform uncertainty." He went to the pharmacy on a Tuesday, 4 days before her deadline. Paloma was behind the counter when he came in. She set down what she was holding when she saw him, and her expression was the same evaluating stillness as that first night on Millwood Road, the look of someone who has been deciding something and has nearly finished. "Harvey told me you were coming," she said. "Harvey doesn't know I'm here." "Harvey definitely knows you're here." She said it with complete certainty and no apology. Emerson almost laughed. He stood at the counter and did not say the careful, measured thing he had been assembling in his head on the drive over. "The last 2 months," he said, "are the first time in a long time that I've had somewhere I genuinely wanted to be on a Tuesday afternoon. I thought you should have that information, regardless of what you decide." Paloma looked at him for a moment. "Harvey told me about the wristwatch," she said. Emerson blinked. "What?" "The one he carries. He told me he stopped winding it after Marta died. That winding it felt like saying that time should keep moving without her." She looked at him evenly. He said he'd started winding it again, that he'd started looking forward to things. He didn't say anything. "He said you looked like someone who'd learned to be busy instead of still," she said, "and that you'd been doing it long enough that it had started to cost you something you hadn't added up yet." Outside, a streetcar went by on Mount Pleasant, its familiar rattle shaking the front window in the way it always had. It was a sound that had been in the background of his whole adult life in this city. He had stopped hearing it years ago. "I don't want you to give up the position," he said. "I want to be worth choosing over it eventually. I understand those aren't the same thing." Paloma was quiet for a moment. "Come back next Tuesday," she said. I'll tell you what I've decided. He came back on Tuesday. She stayed. Not because she gave anything up. A colleague took the Victoria position, someone who had been looking to go west for 2 years and found the timing exactly right. Paloma stayed because she had spent 11 years building her life in this city, and had been close, she told Emerson later, to treating that life as something she needed to apologize for. Harvey told her she was being foolish, which was the most direct he had been to her in months, and she thanked him for it without embarrassment. Conrad extended his stay through Christmas. He came back in March. By May, he was in conversations with his firm about remote arrangements, and Harvey was quietly making dinner on Friday evenings with the matter-of-fact air of a man who has always done this and simply hadn't mentioned it previously. Emerson drove his father up from Guelph for Harvey's 78th birthday in April. His father and Harvey sat on the balcony for 2 hours talking about the 1972 Summit Series with the comfortable intensity of men who have found a subject on which they completely agree. Emerson and Paloma washed the dishes and listened to them through the open window and didn't feel the need to add anything. On a Tuesday the following October, 1 year, almost exactly, after the Rexall on Mount Pleasant, Harvey produced a small envelope from his cardigan pocket and set it on the pharmacy counter in front of Paloma with the ceremonial gravity of someone who has been thinking about this for some time. "What is this?" Paloma asked. "Your letter of commendation," Harvey said. "I've been meaning to write it for months. I had to find the right stationery." She opened it. Inside was a card, handwritten in Harvey's precise print. "You asked an old man how he was doing and you waited for the answer. You remembered his name when the line was long and you were tired. You noticed when he didn't come in. This is rarer than most people know, and more important than most things that get called important." Paloma pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. She took a breath. She laughed. Harvey folded his arms and looked out the pharmacy window with the studied innocence of a man who is very pleased with himself and is performing otherwise. They were married the following October in Harvey's apartment because Harvey had made his position on rented chairs abundantly clear. Paloma's parents came from Winnipeg. Conrad flew in from Calgary with his family. Emerson's father arrived 40 minutes early in his 12-year-old Civic, which was the first time in Emerson's adult memory that his father had been early for anything, and which told him something had shifted in a way he didn't need to name. Harvey wound the wristwatch before the ceremony. He did it without explanation, standing at the window in his pressed gray cardigan, the small deliberate motion of a man making a decision he had postponed long enough. Those who knew what it meant understood. Those who didn't understood enough. Now every Tuesday Emerson picks up Harvey, and they stop at the Tim Hortons on Mount Pleasant for a double-double, and whatever Harvey has decided is worth discussing, which ranges from the second law of thermodynamics to whether the Leafs' defensive system is philosophically coherent. They arrive at the Rexall 12 to 15 minutes later than strictly necessary. Paloma is usually behind the counter. Harvey tells her something she already knows as though it is news. She listens as though it is. Emerson stands next to him and drinks his coffee. The Tuesday he walked into that pharmacy, he had 10 unread emails and a parking meter running out on Yonge Street, and a very clear picture of where he needed to be. He has found in the years since that he was wrong about most of it. He has also found that he does not mind. Some people spend years looking for the place where someone is expecting them. Some people are simply standing in the right line.